For Lakeland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful to participate in the debate on the Liberal government's budget on behalf of the 100,000 people I represent in Lakeland. I'm here in this House today because of the farmers, energy workers, small business owners, public servants, and hardworking families across Lakeland who put their trust in me on October 19th. People in Lakeland are facing adversity head-on, struggling against job losses, the downturn in the energy sector, and helping their neighbours, friends, and families whose lives have been forever impacted by the raging wildfires in northern Alberta. As they continue to build and to rebuild their communities and to pursue their dreams, I'm committed to making sure their voices are heard on government decisions that matter to them, and particularly on how their hard-earned tax dollars are spent. The people of Lakeland believe in a free market economy where Canadian workers are rewarded for their efforts, where entrepreneurs, inventors, investors, and hard workers can provide jobs and prosperity for their communities, and where self-reliance, personal responsibility, and generosity bolster incredible community spirit that supports charities and cares for the vulnerable. In fact, 73% of my constituents voted for fiscally responsible leadership that values every dollar that belongs to the Canadian taxpayer. They know that, as the member for Carleton mentioned last week, a free market economy is the greatest poverty-fighting machine ever invented.
Hear, hear.
Like all of my Conservative colleagues who are privileged to serve the people who sent us here, my focus will always be on everyday Canadians like the middle class this Liberal government purports to care about. Our focus is on everyday Canadians without trust funds and without friends and family in high places, people who go to work and run businesses to earn the money that they dutifully hand over to the government, trusting that their best interests will be taken into consideration and that their money will be spent wisely and with careful discretion and due diligence. The government needs to fund priorities, to put needs before wants, and to remember that they can't spend on everything, just like Canadians plan and prioritize with their families, businesses, and their personal budgets every day. When Liberal politicians cut childcare benefits, when they disallow families to split their income, and when they limit their ability to save for their futures, and then they use taxpayers' dollars to pay for their own nannies, their own personal domestic support. When these politicians use tax dollars for their families to go on trips, for swanky new furniture, paintings, and art, on office renos, while Canadians and their neighbours, their families, their friends are losing their jobs and limiting their budgets to ensure they can pay their bills and their taxes, that's when Canadians lose faith in politicians, and no wonder why. Because when that happens, we MPs are failing our responsibility to Canadians. Mr. Speaker, I'm talking about all of the Albertans still working, and of all those who have lost their jobs in almost unprecedented numbers, and of the millions of Ontarians who must strictly budget to ensure they can pay their bills every month, rural Ontarians and those on fixed incomes who limit groceries or go to food banks because of skyrocketing hydro rates, courtesy of big, out-of-touch government and bad public policy. I'm referring to Maritimers, where my family's from, who once worked in the oil sands, who are now back at home without a job and with few prospects, while governments block opportunities for responsible natural resources development that would provide jobs and benefits for all communities and all provinces. These are the people I think about every day, and these are the people I'm standing to support today as I speak about this government's fiscal fiction budget, as my colleague from Calgary Shepherd has called it. Let's start with the fundamentals. Any government expenditure takes money from someone and gives it to someone else. The Liberal budget includes excessive, untargeted spending that will end up hurting businesses, families, and hardworking Canadians in the form of future tax increases in order to fund government handouts. They've tried to pass this off as standing up for the middle class, but I think Canadians see through the smoke and mirrors and see it for what it really is. I know Canadians in Lakeland do. This government is simply redistributing wealth. The worst part of this, of course, is that what the Liberals are really doing is taking money from people who need it most. As an example, they've alluded to a potential carbon tax in their budget. They haven't provided details yet, and like so many other things this government is doing, of course, we're uncertain, but we know one thing for sure. Ultimately, it's Canadians, families, consumers, business owners, the middle class, and people on fixed incomes, and the working poor, and charities who are going to pay the high costs and increased prices of all goods and services, the guaranteed result of yet another tax. And this particular tax will disproportionately target and harm rural and energy-based communities. Canadian governments collect $17 billion annually from revenue generated by oil and gas workers to fund programs and services and provide benefits that increase the standard of living of all Canadians. Piling on more costs, especially during such challenging times, will only make things so much worse. It's a cold-hearted cash grab Canadians just can't afford. There can also be no guarantee that a national carbon tax would be so-called revenue neutral. I mean, what taxes are ever revenue neutral or dedicated to initiatives aimed at innovation and environmental stewardship? The carbon tax is just a revenue generator for government to feed reckless spending and out-of-control deficits masquerading as environmental policy. Such a tax shift was rejected by Canadians in the 2008 election, something the member for Calgary Heritage reminded me recently. The Liberals are also sending hundreds of millions of Canadians' tax dollars to other countries instead of focusing on the priorities of Canadians and on the services they need and value. Let's not forget the 700,000 middle-class small business owners who are counting on the promised lower small business tax rate of 9%. They're Canada's leading job creators, employing hundreds of thousands of Canadians, contributing to the economies of communities big and small from coast to coast to coast. But because of the Liberals' broken promise, they're going to take $2 billion away from these hard-working business owners over the next 4 years. That's a lot of money that can't be used to grow their businesses, to start up new ones, to hire people, and to increase wages. Meanwhile, the Liberals are still pondering a government bailout of a multi-billion-dollar company while denying the expansion of an airport that would have effectively boosted that company without any taxpayers' dollars. Why does this big government insist on making things so complicated when the answers are often so obvious? Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure Canadians really anticipated this government would blow through their money so quickly. It's not the government's money, it's Canadians' money. They certainly didn't anticipate a deficit ballooning to $30 billion. And they didn't anticipate it because that's not what the Liberals said they'd do. And of course, we know that this exorbitant deficit is a result of choices and not of circumstances. It's because of spending, given that the former Conservative government left a healthy surplus when the Liberals took office. Canadians know that spending more money, increasing and introducing new taxes, and continuously hindering a key sector on which our economy relies will lead to an ongoing spiral of deficits and debt. And who's going to pay for all of this? My friend Michelle's brand new baby daughter, the young women in high school with Girls Inc., who I met this week, the young guys apprenticing to start a career or upgrading their skills to get jobs in a different sector in Lakeland. Grandchildren and great-grandchildren will be paying off the tab, setting them up for fiscal failure before they even begin. Because of decisions today, future governments will have less money for programs and services today's young Canadians deserve. It's irresponsible and it's wrong. This government doesn't seem to get that hiking taxes doesn't create jobs. Governments that go down this path get stuck in a permanent cycle of taxing, borrowing, and spending. And research has found that a negative relationship exists between government debt and economic growth. It impacts real lives. It will come as no surprise to my Conservative colleagues. According to a 2016 study on the cost of government debt, when government debt expands, it can cause long-term interest rates to rise, in turn increasing the cost of private sector borrowing, and then higher borrowing costs can discourage private capital investment, and that's the key driver to long-term economic growth and to jobs. Government debt also results in significant interest payments, similar to paying mortgages or vehicle loans, resulting in less money for priorities that directly impact Canadians' lives, like reducing the tax burden, healthcare, paying for healthcare, education, and social services. Take Ontario, which has the largest subnational sovereign debt in the world. Ontario spends nearly $1 billion per month on debt repayment. Imagine what governments of every level could do with the billions of dollars they're spending on debt servicing, from broad-based tax relief to funding core programs and services. I assure Lakeland and all Canadians who are growing increasingly concerned about their bank accounts and their prosperity that my Conservative colleagues and I will continue to stand up for the hardworking taxpayers in communities from Prince Rupert to Bonnyville, from Lloydminster to Charlottetown, and everywhere in between. We'll continue to be the voice of hardworking people who actually earn their own money and work tirelessly to provide for their families.